Perfect. So a little bit about me. I am Tracy Ragan. I am the CEO of DeployHub. I've been around the business of application lifecycle management for quite some time, my entire career. I am on the board of the CD Foundation. I'm the member representative, so thank you for all who voted for me. I'm doing hardest work I could possibly do, and I started with the landscape as my first project. I was also on the Eclipse Foundation board, which gave me a very interesting introduction to open source. I love dogs and horses. I have a black belt, and I highly recommend Santa Fe as a place to live. I love it. Oops. So we continue to kind of hammer what the purpose of the CD Foundation is. I really like using this introduction to what CD is, according to the CD Foundation, and we consider it an engineering process more than a product or a specific tool. And that is incredibly important to remember as we walk through this landscape business that we're about to talk about. So what's really driving this conversation? I mean, I've been doing ALM for 25 years, or a little more. Let's just say 25. And there has been always a discussion about automating more and more of our steps between development and production. But what's driving this conversation to be more important? Well, my belief is that AI and machine learning is driving it more than anything that we've ever done. And I also believe that I used to be an AI developer. I was a tiers developer for IBM. And back then, we realized we did not have the kind of processing power we needed for real AI. And it died. But Kubernetes and the ability to spin up processors and GPUs has really created a platform that allows us to change the way we think about software, what we write, and what we deliver to end users, and the kind of innovation that we deliver to end users. So this was an article done by a couple of guys from Oxford. And according to them, about 47% of the jobs that we know of today in the US will be replaced by AI. Now, I did not write this screen after I saw Dark Fate, which is pretty funny because Dark Fate talks about this. If you haven't gone to see it yet, I highly recommend the Terminator Dark Fate. But jobs like, AWS, of course, if you went into any of their distribution centers, you're not going to see a lot of people. You're going to see a lot of robots. I bet most of you, if you came from the Silicon Valley, has bought coffee from a robot. And one of the top jobs that's going to be replaced is accounting, CPAs. So we're talking about big jobs that are going to be going away. But what does that mean? It means that we have to write a lot more software. And we have to adapt. The waterfall is going to dry up. Dev, test, prod, a kind of waterfall life cycle is going to go away. It just is. We used to think about agile development and continuous delivery about fast. It's not just about fast. It's about sustainability. Just like we're automating who's making your coffee, we are automating how the products get pushed through the life cycle. That's the core of what we're doing here at the CD Foundation, is understanding what we need to do better as a community to make it work. It's been a constant frustration for me when I go in to see our customers and they have so much written around Jenkins and scripts. We are not going to be able to sustain replacing 47% of the jobs in America running robots and managing data with scripts. We have to automate. And new tooling is required because the transparency of all this is essential. So basically, we have a massive pipe of software to develop. And we can't spend a lot of time tweaking things from dev to test, to user acceptance, to whatever stage is next, and then finally to prod. So I'm often asked, what's the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment? But what I want to start with is at our highest level on our CD pipeline, as we all know, is the orchestration tool. We just saw a really great demo of Spinnaker as an orchestration tool. Many of you understand Jenkins as an orchestration tool. But under that, there are the workhorses and some of the products that do the heavy lifting. And they oftentimes get misunderstood. So the purpose of the landscape is to begin a discussion, not just me talking at you or anybody from the CD Foundation talking at you, but we have to talk to each other about what this landscape looks like. We have to really understand what works, what doesn't, and the only way we can do that is to have a discussion amongst us. So here is the first cut of the landscape. This went through many iterations. I had help from folks at CloudBees, from Google. This was a pretty broad discussion, and it was approved by the TOC of the CDF. Thank you very much for those of you in the room who are on that board for doing some of this work. And I'm going to go through each one of these, but what I want to emphasize is this is a living document. It's going to grow and change. I mean, if you look at that, how many of you ever have seen the CNCF interactive landscape? Yeah, it's a really great tool to kind of figure out, this is where I'm at, what do I need? But it's gotten crazy busy. I believe that our landscape will get busy as well. Maybe not this busy, but it will grow and change. So let's start at the top. What we all really understand as when we think about continuous delivery pipelines, we think about continuous integration and CI and CD. So continuous integration is where we started, right? We all started doing this great thing. We had these massive build scripts. We wanted to kick them off as frequently as possible, so we created a trigger, and Jenkins was the leader in doing that. We created a trigger when we did a check-in to whatever we were using at the time, CVS possibly even, and immediately ran a compile. And honestly, we have been doing that for a long time. Even before Jenkins, most of us in the room, if you were in ALM, was doing something of that level. We just never had a clean platform to execute it in. We ran commands on a Microsoft server, at least I did. And then we've graduated into pipeline orchestration tools, which means if you have a workflow that really, you're the developer and you put a workflow together in Jenkins and your CI process that got triggered from a check-in, did your compile, then you ran some tests, or then you deployed it out to something. You ran a deployment script that stuck it on your binary in a location, and then you ran some scripts, and everything was cool. You wanted to push it to test. So you wanted one workflow to execute another workflow. Now we have a pipeline. So that's really what CI and CD is at its core. And it's not, again, a tool. It's an engineering process. And that engineering process is all about getting stuff through the pipeline as fast as possible. So let's go in the first category. This is a category I actually forgot until one night I woke up and was like, oh, I forgot version control tools. But it's the standard. It's not something I thought about. I didn't remember that I had to remember it. But everybody understands what the standards are. Change tracking and defect tracking, we've all done that now for a very long time. But this, again, is part of this. It's like the standard of CI, of this pipeline process. The rest are get a little bit fuzzier, and this is where it really falls apart. If I ask somebody who's a manager or a senior level person at a company, they really struggle with understanding the definitions of these parts of this pipeline. And I call these the workhorses. These are the tools that are really doing a lot of the heavy lifting and build out what we know of as a fast and clean pipeline. So if we think about build automation is really came from Make. How many of you remember Make? Hopefully, yeah. Most of us remember Make. And some of you, I bet most of you have an application that's running a 4 or 5 hour Make script someplace in the organization, especially on a Unix machine that nobody wants to touch. We're talking about compiling and linking. So you've got checkout, and then you've got compiling and linking. Jenkins may have executed and said, go and do that work, but it's the script underneath it that did the actual build automation. There are tools out there that fit into that category, like Ant and Maven and Meister. There's other build tools that fit under there. Release automation. Again, this is an area that gets really confusing for people. You have continuous delivery, you have continuous deployment, and then you have release automation. Release automation tools really focus on automating the execution of the deployment itself and tracking where it deployed to, tracking who deployed it, what occurred, and I believe release automation, as we move down this process, is going to become a bigger conversation. It may be called, what I like to call it is continuous deployment, which really confuses everybody because they think that's continuous delivery. And then test automation, which is much easier to understand. But again, there are tools that do this much better than writing a script. So anytime you talk to me, I'm going to be saying, try to move away from scripting and automate, truly automate. A script is not necessarily automation. You might have wrote the script and it really does well for you, but if you leave, somebody else goes there, they have no idea what that script did. So scripting can obfuscate really what's happening under the covers and confuse the situation. Configuration and library management. This has always been a topic, but it's really been a topic associated to the compile process. What do you have in your transitive dependencies? Artifactory, Nexus, those kinds of tools helped us solve those kinds of problems. Now, in microservices, this is going to change a little, and we're going to talk about it. Configuration management also becomes an issue with microservices, and we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But think about the fact that you're not linking anymore at build time, you link at runtime. The configuration management step that happened at the build is going to be a little different. So configuration management is going to be, and library management are going to be some of the tools that are going to change the way the landscape looks when you're doing microservices. Then there's infrastructure deployments, really critical for Kubernetes environments. Those are tools like Rancher, for example, that build out the actual deployments. Think about products like Puppet. They kind of made it to the market by helping us automate our infrastructure deployments. Puppet, Chef, those types of tools. And these tools are changing and growing too with this new Kubernetes modern architecture. Then there's a whole new area that's image build and container registry that's specific to containers. And we don't have this in our monolithic kind of server base. We create a binary or a jar file or a WAR file. This becomes a new area of the landscape, brand new area to talk about. And then the icing on the cake. We can start building in security. There are tools out there that will help you build out security. Now, I've only taken a few of these topics. There's others that we should be having. You can just go over a few of the topics. We need to have a square out there for people who are service providers in this area. As we were talking earlier, there's MLOps that's going to be more important, which is really workflows, but for machine learning. There is Agile practices. I know Agile sounds old, but Agile is really how you set your development process up is key to your pipeline. Value stream management, we hear a lot about tracking, creating a continuous feedback loop, and that's what value stream management tools are. And we need to add that to our landscape. So let's just think about, while you're here, this is KubeCon. This is a perfect opportunity to start talking to each other about what you're doing differently in a monolithic landscape compared to microservices. Everybody understands that if you have an independently deployable object, what does that mean? I'll test you. If it's independently deployable, what does that mean for your workflow or your pipeline? Do you have one workflow for your application? That's what I hear most people say, we're going to isolate them. So you're going to have, for each microservice that's independently deployable, it's going to have its own workflow, right? Kind of makes sense. Which means that your application gets, the concept of an application doesn't even exist anymore. You have an application is a collection of microservices that executes in your Kubernetes cluster. That's what an application is. So think about what code will look like. Code's going to look different. Code's going to be smaller. Think functions. If you have a function, how many times, and you check it into Git, how many times are you really going to branch and merge that function? Not very. I wouldn't think very often. And you're not going to have thousands of lines of code for a microservice. It's going to be smaller, hundreds of lines of code, as opposed to thousands. You're also going to have smaller builds, because if you have smaller pieces of code, you have smaller compiles. And maybe you don't even have a compile step because it's all Python. Lambda functions. Things don't necessarily have to compile. So this concept of checking in your code, creating branching and merging, and then doing a trigger to check it out because you got to run your build to create your binary, kind of goes away. We're going to see that fall away as we push and push and push into microservices. We're going to see a lot more sharing and reuse. If we do this correctly, if we do microservices correctly, and I say that because we didn't do object-oriented correctly. If I was a professor up here, I'd say, hey guys, we failed, and gals, we failed at object-oriented programming. We started renaming libraries because we wanted to check it into our own Git repository and then compile it our own way. That was not object-oriented programming, that was copied code. And it failed the goal of having high levels of reuse. Microservices, the intent is to have a high level of reuse. It solves many problems, but we can't go down the road of making brand new ones all the time by renaming them, for example. We have this concept now of an image build, right? You're going to be creating a container, not a WAR file or a jar file. You'll just have a container. And your container is like your new MSI installer. In a sense, it becomes your binary and your installer. And again, we have to start tracking what an application, we have to see it as a logical view, not an actual thing. We have to keep track of it, of application as a logical view, and we have to learn to keep track of versions of applications and versions of microservices. So in conclusion, I know we were running a little late, so I'm trying to get us back on schedule. The introduction of modern architecture is going to really change what we talk about when we talk about landscape, when we talk about testing, when we talk about deployments, we talk about builds. It's going to change a lot. And this is the time to begin the conversation, and this is the forum to do it in, because everybody's interested in this particular problem set. We need to figure out how to do it better for monolithic, but we also need to get prepared for what we need to do for microservices. So I encourage all of you to visit the landscape. If you are a provider in this space, you can add your logo, and you can do that all on your own. You do not have to call us. You can create a pull request to have your company added. If you are a user and you feel like there should be another category out there and you know of a product that should fit in it, I highly encourage everybody to get involved in the conversation by talking about this landscape and helping us grow and improve it. And you can get to both the meetup and the landscape if you go to cd.foundation. We're going to have more discussions on this, and I'm really pushing this for this next 4 days. We do have some demos that were scheduled out on the booth area tomorrow and Wednesday. Puppet is going to be hanging out at our booth, so that is not a mistake. They're going to do their demo at our booth as well. And this you can find on the events page, but I'll leave it up there for a second. People are taking photos of it. And I want to point out some thought leaders in this space. It's a brave thing to start a brand new foundation, and these organizations went out and did it. And it's the perfect time for it, and I applaud all of them for thinking about the CD Foundation, and particularly Cloud Bees. Tracy Miranda, our fearless leader here, and nobody has any idea the kind of work she put into getting this organization together, so we have her to thank for it. And then tonight. So tonight, the importance of tonight is that there's nobody who's going to be speaking or doing anything in terms of selling product. The 4 sponsors, we're going to have tables there. So if you want to come and talk to us, please do. But what we want, there'll be 8 tables set up, cocktail tables, and there's going to be a topic on each one of them. And what we want you to do is come and talk to each other about those particular wheelhouses. So if you're interested in security, there'll be a security table for all of you to congregate around and chat with. There'll be a facilitator so that we make sure that if the table gets too tight, we can push it open so the people standing in the second and third rows behind are opened up and included. But it will be an important time to start this discussion, and it gives you the entire week to really think about it and follow up with those individuals and new friends that you've made. So please come tonight, and it's at the Marriott Marquis. Level 1, Point Saloma, which apparently is fairly close to this room, through the South Tower. So really the best companies now have moved from monolithic to microservices. This is the time for you guys to start talking about how to do it, and don't wait for your development teams to really have built out a microservices application before you think about how you're going to start managing it. You want to do that beforehand. As a person with many years of experience in this lifecycle field, I have found that when you do it later, it's a lot harder. And you can come find me at booth number SC54 or Twitter at Tracy Ragan. Thank you.